Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to make some Italian season, like sauteed chicken with a gnocchi and pesto, kind of like a pesto sauce with mushrooms and zucchini. And we're also going to make up some sourdough discard coffee cake. So let's start with our coffee cake and we'll kind of get that going. And yeah. Okay, I'm going to just slide this over here. We're going to start with our wet ingredients for, well, actually not. We're going to start with our butter and our sugar, and we're going to cream them together in this. I have melted butter, but that's going to be going for making that kind of crumb topping in the middle of a coffee cake and also on top. So we're going to start with our butter here, and you want it to be softened. Let's get all of it off of my little thing. Don't want to waste any butter. Okay, and then we are going to add in 1 whole cup of granulated sugar. And then I'm just going to kind of do a quick cream on these to get them mixed together, and then we'll add in our wet ingredients. But it's harder to cream the sugar into the butter right now if you add in all the other ingredients. Okay, so let's kind of cream these two together. And with the soft butter, it should mix up fairly easily. You could do a hand mixer if you wanted to. The only with the hand mixer is that you have a tendency to over mix your ingredients towards the end, which can lead to a stiffer coffee cake, which I want it to be nice and fluffy and full of flavor. Get a little of that butter off. So I'm just kind of really swooshing it together to kind of cream it. And that's just going to incorporate it. As you can see, it just comes together pretty easily. Now we are going to add in our eggs, our milk, our sourdough discard, and our sour cream. So the good first portion of our wet ingredients. So 2 eggs, a 1/2 cup of milk. I'm using whole milk. And then we're going to add in a 1/2 cup of sour cream. Let's see if this one's open. It's just not. We go through a lot of sour cream in our house. My kids feel like when they eat potatoes, they need copious amounts of sour cream. And we need a 1/2 cup of sour cream. So I'm just going to kind of squeeze out what looks like a 1/2 cup to me. And then a 1/2 cup of our sourdough discard. So I'm going to actually feed this up later. We're going to make a focaccia for tonight to have with our dinner tonight and prep our a new loaf for tomorrow. So we've got our 1/2 cup of our discard. I'm going to add this in. And then we're going to mix all of these wet ingredients together. Just going to make sure I get all of that good sourdough discard out. Let me poke those yolks. And we're going to mix this. And this is going to be our kind of our wet base that we will then, we'll put our vanilla, our salt, and then our baking powder in here. And once this is nice and mixed up, then we'll add our flour. And I always like to do that. That way it takes out the step of sifting like your baking powder into your flour. And I find it just mixes up well.
You have a question? What is discard?
Discard is your starter for your sourdough. And before you feed it, you've got to throw away half. Otherwise, you'll have too much sourdough starter. So it's essentially just your fermented starter right before it's fed, which is just flour and water that's been fermenting on there. We made this starter right when we got back from vacation in January. So it's been going strong now for, what are we in August? Like 8 months now. It just keeps, and you just feed it every 1 to 3 days. Or if you pop it, your like starter in the fridge, it's, like once every 10 days. Okay, we got it. But the sourdough starter really makes the recipe delicious. It gives you like the good health benefits of it, but it has just like a nice flavor.
Does your starter have a name?
I don't really have a name. Okay, it's not true. It does have a name. My husband named this, and it's a little ridiculous. It's Gus Gus, but it is Augustus Gustavus, which is short for Gus Gus. I do call him he all the time. I guess you should probably get in the habit of calling him Gus Gus. But yes, technically he does have a name. He's my fat one. I have a thinner one that goes over there, but my fat one is Gus Gus because you got to remember from Cinderella, the fat mouse was Gus Gus. Okay, we're going to add in baking powder. We need we need 2 teaspoons of baking powder. So 1, 2, and then we're going to use a teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of vanilla extract. There we go. And then we'll mix all of these together. We want to make sure that baking powder gets completely mixed in here. And then we will add in our flour, and then we're going to make our crumb base for this. And now when you mix your baking powder in here, it's going to make your mixture a little bit more fluffy, a little bit lighter. That's just because it's kind of doing that, like reacting with the sour cream and the discard. Here we go. So we've got it nice and mixed up here. So now we're going to add in our flour, which is just 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour. And this is going to be kind of the vanilla cake base for our coffee cake. And we are doing mini loaves because they're perfect like serving sizes for my kids, and they don't take nearly as long to bake. So we're going to add in 1.5 cups of flour here. And then we're just going to mix this until it's just barely combined. Again, you don't want to over mix it or you'll get a stiffer cake versus a nice and fluffy cake. So we're just going to kind of mix it around until most of that flour is incorporated in here. And we don't have to worry about like the baking powder getting mixed in because we mix that thoroughly in with our wet ingredients. So that is already evenly dispersed. But here we're going to have this just nice kind of really chunky batter. And it's going to be thick because it is a butter-based batter. There we go. So we've got that mixed up. Now we need to make our delicious crumb filling, which is going to go in the middle of the coffee cake as well on the top. So we are going to start out with a cup of brown sugar. So I'm going to pack it down. This is a 1/2 cup here, so I'm going to need 2 halves. And then we're going to mix in a 1/2 cup of melted butter. And we're going to stir this up. Then we're going to add in our cinnamon and then finally our flour. But I find if you add the flour in first, then the cinnamon doesn't get as easily dispersed. So we're going to mix this up. There we go. And then we're going to add in a tablespoon of cinnamon. So this is going to be that nice cinnamon coffee, like, you know, big, rich cinnamon flavor that they have on the coffee cake. Got this. I'm going to finally get this out. I've got like a little teeny tiny measuring spoon that's been lost in here, which actually happens to be a tablespoon. So we're going to use it. So 1 whole tablespoon of cinnamon. And then we are going to mix that all the way in here. And this is going to give it a really dark color. And this is going to be the base of our crumble for our coffee cake. And then we'll start on our chicken and our pesto gnocchi that we'll be having for lunch today. So we've got this base here. Now we're going to add in a cup of all-purpose flour to kind of create this crumb. There we go. Put this back on, and then I'm going to slide this out of the way. And then I'm just going to mix it together until all of that is kind of mixed into it. I might have to go in with my fingers to break it up a little bit because we want it to be nice and kind of crumbly for our mixture, but I might be able to do it just with my spatula. But we're going to need our hands anyways to be sprinkling this on. So just make sure that flour gets thoroughly mixed in here, but we don't want it to be like a thick ball or anything like that. You want it to be lots of crumbs. Here we go. So you can see we've got our lovely crumb topping here. Now let's put it in our little mini loaves. So I've got my mini loaf pan, which makes 8 mini loaves, which I find is like the perfect size for this. You could also you could put this in a 9x9 baking pan, like a little one of those squares, or you could put it in, you could do cupcakes too. So it's really versatile. The only difference is the 9x9 pan is going to take like twice as long to cook versus the cupcakes and the mini loaves, which is kind of why I love the mini loaves. So we're going to fill all of these up about halfway. So I'm just going to kind of go through and give it a little bit of a scoop. And then we're going to put half of our crumb mixture over these, and then we're going to fill it up with the remaining kind of our cake here. So just try to be careful, like not to overfill them. I once made a coffee cake, and I was doing cupcakes, and I overfilled the cupcakes, and I didn't realize how much batter I was using. So the difference between the cupcake layer, like that middle layer, and the crumb, it was like pretty much all crumb on top. So, I mean, it still tasted delicious. Just didn't have quite that pretty little center here. I'm making kind of a mess. Okay, so we've kind of got this base here. I'm going to give this a nice little shake, which will allow it to kind of lay out flat. And I'm just going to wash my fingers because I got some batter on it. And now we're going to take half of our crumb mixture and we're going to kind of pour it, sprinkle it over each one. And this is going to give you that cinnamon kind of layer in the middle of your coffee cake. And this one, I'm just going to kind of break it up so we don't have to have super big chunks in it. And then we're going to come back and spoon the rest of our batter over it. Here we go. Now, because we're doing this layer in the middle and then we'll have this crumb on top, these will cook longer than like, say, traditional mini loaves because they're kind of weighed down, and this kind of sugar streusel middle kind of acts like an insulator and kind of just slows down the cooking process a little bit. Okay. This should be good. We've got our nice kind of cinnamon middle layer here. Now we're going to go back over and we're going to kind of carefully spoon over the top of each one of these. And this will make about, a dozen muffins. So if you wanted to do it in the muffin ones. And I'm going to cook these at 350 for about 20 to 25 minutes. Muffins will probably only take about 20 minutes since they're a little bit smaller for each one. And a 9x9 inch pan is going to take you closer to 45 minutes to bake up. Here we go. I want to make sure I have enough to go through all of it. So I'm just going to do little spoons on this last part, and then I'll fill back over. Here we go. And might have to steal some from the other side. I always sometimes put a little bit too much and misjudge exactly how much I have in my bowl. And we just want this kind of to be, it doesn't have to be completely covered. Some people, when they make coffee cake, they don't even do a middle swirl. They just do all of the streusel on top. I like the middle swirl because I think it breaks, let me wash it. It breaks up the vanilla cake part, gives you a bit more flavor. Okay, now we're gonna go, we'll do this real quick shake. Kind of lets it fall to the side. And then, let me just clean that up. We're gonna put our remaining kind of crumb topping on here, and then these get to pop right into the oven. And then we can start on the rest of our lunch here. Here we go. So we're going to have, I got some chicken breasts that we're going to just do a quick kind of a Italian seasoned marinade on them using Worcestershire, some Italian spices, powdered onion, garlic, salt. And then we're going to cook up our gnocchi in there, and we're going to make a kind of a creamy pesto sauce. I'm not going to make completely homemade pesto today because my basil plants are still not giving me a whole lot of basil, but we are going to add fresh basil to it. Here we go. Now that we've got a nice covering, I'm just going to take this remaining crumb and really pile it up. Now, this crumb is what makes these so delicious because, I mean, it's coffee cake. Who doesn't love the crumb? Okay. Wash my hands, and we're going to pop that in the oven. Okay. So, again, these take a little bit longer to cook because of that streusel topping on it, because it really kind of weighs it down and kind of creates like an insulation for it. So we're going to pop this in there, and we are going to let it bake at 350. I'm going to set my timer for 25 minutes, and it should be done and nice, kind of dark brown on the top. Okay, let's get on to lunch. I'm going to turn my water up nice and high here for our gnocchi because we're just going to do a quick boil on it, and then we'll kind of set it to the side. I'm going to add a little bit of salt to it. That way they'll get a nice little flavor. So just about, 2 teaspoons of salt. And once it comes to a nice hot rolling kind of boil on here, then we are going to drop, well, it's actually already there. We're going to drop our gnocchi in. And one of these days, I'm going to make homemade gnocchi on screen. It's great, I will say, to make some gnocchi if you have leftover mashed potatoes. You can repurpose them into some really good homemade. I know, that's a sin there. I'm like, one day I'll think ahead and I'll make a lot of potatoes to have it leftovers for it. I know we don't often have leftovers. When you feeding a large crowd, no matter how much food I make my family, everybody is always hungry. I mean, our blondies, which I was like, oh, I'll make blondies. I'll be able to put them in the kids' lunch box, this week. And they're almost all gone. I don't even know if they'll make it to tomorrow to go into their lunch boxes. So I'm going to have to make another snack to put in their lunch box because I swear anytime I make a dessert, they're like instantly eat it all. And it's not like I don't ever make desserts. I make them quite frequently. Okay, let's get our chicken. I'm kind of doing a quick little marinade on here and kind of season it up. But first, what we're going to do is I'm going to fillet my chicken breasts in half. And then we'll slice them up nice and thin. Cut against the grain, and you'll have more tender pieces of chicken because you're kind of breaking up those, muscle fibers and whatnot. Here we go. And since we're going to be doing kind of a quick saute in the pan, I'm just going to do kind of nice smaller slices for it. Nothing too thick because if you make it too thick, then they have to cook longer and then you're going to risk drying out your chicken. So we'll keep it nice, kind of thinner so we can do that quick sear on here. Let's get these guys sliced up. And then again, we're going to just do a really quick kind of marinade on it using Worcestershire sauce. That's kind of a vinegar-based sauce. And the vinegar in there is going to kind of help break down the natural fat in the chicken to keep it nice and juicy. The same way that like lemon juice, it kind of works down to break down the fat in chicken as well. And we'll use some Italian seasoning, garlic, salt, and some onion powder. Okay, we've got our chicken here.
Yeah, question. Is gnocchi same as dumpling?
No, not really. They're not as soft and fluffy as a dumpling is. And they have a potato base to them, so they're a bit denser, but they're a delicious pasta. So they're potato pasta. So you're essentially using potato and flour to make it. Let's add our Worcestershire here. So we're going to give a nice drizzle over it, probably about a tablespoon or so. Enough to kind of coat it, but it doesn't need to be drenching. We're going to do, these are 2 big chicken breasts, so we're going to do about, a teaspoon and a half of garlic salt, because that's a little over a pound of meat. We're going to use some onion powder. This is going to give it a nice savory flavor, as well as help kind of, get a nice sear on it. We're going to put about a teaspoon on here. And then we're going to use just some Italian seasoning, kind of keeping it simple, but it will play well with our pesto flavor. But you could also just do, basil and oregano as well. We're going to put about 2 teaspoons in here. I want enough to really coat it so it has this nice flavor. And I'm going to get my tongs and toss this. These are going to boil for about 1 to 2 more minutes. Gnocchi doesn't take very long to cook up. And so you just don't want to overcook it, or it will get, like regular pasta. It will get a little mushy and stuff like that. I'm throwing my chicken everywhere here. Okay. Got it. Let's start heating up our oil to go in to cook our chicken. I'm going to put in about maybe 1.5 tablespoons in here, because I've got my 12-inch pan, so I want a good amount in there, so that it none of my chicken will stick. When your gnocchi is ready, and you can't really tell right now because we've got a lot of foam on top, but once it starts kind of coming to the top and floating, that's when it's nice and ready. So I'm going to turn it down because I can feel it floating already at the top, so I should know it should be nice and ready. Before we dump this out, I'm going to actually steal a little bit of my water to kind of thin out my sauce here for our kind of pesto sauce. And this works, because gnocchi is a pasta. This is starchy water that will work just the same as regular pasta water to kind of thicken up any sauces. So I'm going to reserve about 3/4 of a cup. And now you can see that I've turned it off. All of my gnocchi are floating on the top, so they are nice and ready. So I'm going to strain them. Here we go. And then we'll just kind of let it there sit up. We don't need to coat them with any butter or anything like that, or oil, because we will be throwing in them into our sauce, so they'll get coated there and kind of come apart. Okay. Once this is nice and hot, we will throw this chicken in. I'm going to move this out of the way. And then, because I was a little crazy with my tongs, just going to do a quick wipe down. So although everything will be cooked, just want to make sure. I always like to have, I use one cutting board for my meat and the other one for my veggies. So I'm always like, I got to make sure it stays nice and clean. Okay, let's get our veggies kind of sauteing up for our pasta. I'm going to use a little bit less than half of a yellow onion here. We're also going to use a little bit of green onion for our dish. But I don't need the onion to be overpowering here, but I do want a little flavor of it. So I'm going to mince it up so that it will go lovely in our pesto sauce. Keeping it, nice and fine. A lot of times I kind of, cut my onion based on like what it's being served with. So, if I'm going to be serving it with like long, skinny noodles, I typically do long, thinner slices. Gnocchi's kind of like a little ball, so that's why I'm wanting to do more of a delicate cut on it. There we go. Let's put a little bit of olive oil in this pan, and we'll let that start to heat up as well. Put about a tablespoon in here because this is just a 3-quart saute pan, so it's not quite as big. And we'll let that heat up. That feels like it's nice and hot. I'll do my drip test. If it sizzles right away, I'm pretty close. Yep, there we go. Then we're ready to put our first in there. I'm going to drop my chicken in. I'm going to do this in batches. So if it's because I don't think it's all going to fit in one. And then I'll kind of remove it out. And that way they'll all get a good sear on it. When you throw all of your meat in at one time and it doesn't have its own space on the pan, you're not going to get a good sear, and then it's going to seize out the juices because it's not hot enough to sear it and trap them in. And therefore you won't even get a good sear on it at all.
What temperature is your pan at?
Right now I had it heated up to, I kind of was heating it up on to a 7, but I'm going to turn it down to about a 5.5, 6, so a medium high for it once now that we have the meat cooking in there. But I always heat it up higher and then turn it down. For my onions, I'm going to cook this on about a 4. I'm going to get them in there. There we go. Slide. This is my gnocchi spoon. Make some room over here. I'm just going to give this a nice little stir. And we're going to let these kind of saute, get a little bit of caramelization on them, but I want them to really just get more translucent. Then we're going to add in our mushrooms. I've got about 8 ounces of baby Bella mushrooms here that we're going to slice up for it. And then we also have a zucchini. I'm going to saute my mushrooms before the zucchini because zucchini has a higher water content. And so if I saute that up first, I won't get as good of a kind of a saute on my mushrooms. Because kind of the way I go when I'm sauteing vegetables is you go, typically onions always first. And then I do like my firmest vegetable next. So a lot of times that's carrot or celery or peppers. And then I go to the softer vegetables. And when it comes to the softer vegetables, I fry the ones that have the lower water content up first. So in this case, you know, mushrooms before zucchini, or I would do zucchini before tomatoes because tomatoes are juicy. And that just is going to allow you to get a better sear on everything. Get these last little guys. And let me grab my spatula here. We're going to turn these over. These should have a nice kind of sear on them now. Beautiful. So we're going to flip these over. You see we've got that nice, beautiful sear on it. And that's because we didn't overload the pan and we waited for the pan to get nice and hot when we before adding in the chicken. You won't get a good sear if your pan is cold. So you do need to heat it up. There we go. And then I'm just going to let that cook for a little bit longer. Add that right here. And our onions are starting. They're, you know, I have just maybe like 1 or 2 left that are opaque in there, but the rest are getting translucent. We're getting a little bit of caramelization on them. So I'm going to add in my mushrooms. Here we go. And just kind of coat them up nicely here. And then we're going to kind of prep our zucchini. But let me grab a small container or a bowl to take our chicken out first, because this should be all ready now. And you don't want to overcook your chicken either, because if you do, you are going to get a rubbery chicken. There we go. And then we're going to put our next batch of chicken in. So we've got our first one sauteing or nice and sauteed. Our pan's hot, so the next batch is going in. And then we're going to cut up our zucchini. We can saute them off. And then we'll be kind of getting towards the end of everything. We'll just make our sauce. And hopefully our coffee cake will be nice and ready. Okay, we're ready. We're done with these. checking my time limit. We
I
got
have a question. Can you go over the seasoning on the chicken?
yes. So for the chicken, we coated them with some Worcestershire sauce, about a tablespoon. Then we added about a teaspoon and a half of garlic salt, about 2 teaspoons of Italian seasoning, and a teaspoon of onion powder, and really coated everything. And that's what we're kind of sauteing them off. The Worcestershire sauce is going to help keep the meat really nice and juicy. And then, of course, we've got those savory flavors with the garlic and onion powder and then the spices. I'm going to quarter my zucchini here. And then we're going to kind of toss it in with our mushrooms in just a second. And we're sauteing all of our vegetables up before we add and make our sauce, because I want them to get that good sear on them, or that saute on them, so that they just have better flavor and texture in our dish. Otherwise, if you make them and put them in the sauce right away, they get soggy. Okay. Give a little toss here. Perfect. So I'm going to spread these out. And I've got them cooking on about a 5 here. While we're waiting for those kind of to cook up, let's prep our green onion. We're going to kind of throw the white parts in. I'll throw them in now, and then I'm going to save my green parts to go on towards the end with my fresh basil. So the white parts I'm going to throw in now because they're going to have a stronger flavor, and so I do like them to cook off a little bit. But the green parts, those are best thrown on at the last minute to add that really fresh onion kick to it. Otherwise, if you do it, put it in too soon, then they wilt and then they lose their flavor. Okay, and then I've got my fresh basil here, which we're going to add. Now, what would probably make this even better is if I made my own pesto. But like I said, I planted so many basil plants this year. I planted 10 of them. And they have just not wanted to, like, they're not gotten really big like my previous ones. So they're not doing like super great on it. Okay, we're going to add in our zucchini, and then we're going to flip our chicken. There we go. I'm going to give this a little quick toss, and then we're going to kind of flatten it out and let it sear up and try to get a good sear on it. Now let's flip our chicken here. Beautiful. So you see we got this lovely kind of golden brown crust on it. And again, that's what you get from making sure your pan is hot when you're searing it off, and you're not overcrowding it. Because two things, overcrowding it, first of all, when you put all your cold chicken in, it's going to make your pan colder, so it's not going to get as hot. And they don't have enough space on the pan to heat up, so what they'll do is they'll get warm, and then they kind of just drip out their juices, which doesn't get you, a nice sear on it. And second, if your pan's not hot enough when you do it, again, your chicken will warm up, and instead of crisping up like that, and then it just kind of drips out its juices. So there's 2 ways you can kind of go wrong if you're not patient. Okay, let's season up our zucchini over here and our mushrooms. We're just going to do a little over the top here and let them kind of soak up. I always like what I say is I kind of let them hydrate. So I'm going to sprinkle just so, probably, a little less than a teaspoon of garlic salt over it. And then I'm going to do a little bit of Italian seasoning. Now we are going to be adding in pesto, so we don't need to go super crazy, but I do like them to have a little bit of extra flavor. So sprinkle that, and then a little bit of onion powder, which is going to give it a just nice savory flavor. I'm going to let those kind of saute up. I'm going to just take a peek. Good. Good timing. We're making good timing on everything. Okay. Here we go. Our chicken Looks like it is nice and ready. So I'm going to just add it all into our bowl over here, which will be perfect because I want to take it out of my pan. If you leave it in your pan, it's going to continue to cook, and that's when it will dry out. Okay. There we go. Let's give, I'm going to slide this guy over here now. Let's give our zucchini and our mushrooms a little flip here as we start to get our base kind of sauteed down. You can just smell that garlic and those Italian spices. And I'm cooking them over a nice high heat to get this good saute on them. Now we're going to we'll start kind of making the base of it. I've got my pesto. Now this is where I feel like store-bought pesto can either make or break your meal. I only like 2 brands of store-bought pesto. I like Costco's, which is their Kirkland one, which I like because it's more of a Parmesan pesto with the basil in it, but it has a really nice flavor. And I like Rana's, I'm not sure exactly how they pronounce the A on that. I like their pesto because it tastes very similar to this one, and it doesn't have too much of a pine nut flavor. We're going to add in right now about 2 heaping spoonfuls, so about a tablespoon and a half. And this is like an oil, like a cheese base in there. So it will saute up nicely. It's going to season up in our flavors. But that's why I didn't want to add any more oil to this, because if you add too much oil, then you're going to have a greasier pesto dish. Okay. You can smell that lovely scent from it. And what I'm going to do now is we're going to kind of spread this out, and then I'm going to put my cream in the middle here because we're going to do kind of a creamier base. I'm going to add about a 1/3 cup of cream, and we're going to just slowly kind of mix this in. There we go. And then you make sure when you're adding it, you want to scrape off any bits on the bottom of your pan so that you get all of those kind of tasty bits from your veggies. There we go. So we've got this kind of nice kind of creamy sauce here. I'm going to add just a smidge more since we have quite a bit of vegetables in here. So,
you have a question. Is this a meal that's good for freezing down?
Honestly, yes. Actually, I think it would, because it's got a cream-based sauce. So you just have to make sure that you let it de-thaw all the way before you try to heat it up. It's when you're reheating things that have like a cream base, you never want to go from frozen to like de-thawed in the microwave. It's better to let it sit overnight in the fridge to come to thaw. But yes, the cream in it, what I think would allow it to actually hold up well. Now, the only thing that might get a little bit mushy is the zucchini, but you could easily switch that out for, kale would hold up well, or spinach, or even, like a green bean if you wanted to. Okay, I'm going to just kind of coat these all the way around. And then I'm going to go get a spoon and taste to see if we need to add anything else. Perfect. And you've got that kick of the Italian spices with the pesto, which has got that basil base, which is delicious. The cream sauce has kind of really thickened up in here, so it's nice and rich, but it's not super heavy. Let's coat it. Let's add in our fresh herbs now, right at the end. If you were going to freeze this down, I would wait to add in your fresh herbs until you reheated it. That way you'll kind of make it nice and fresh again. So we're going to add in our green onions here, and then our fresh basil. Here we go. And we'll just give this a nice little stir, kind of coat those nice herbs in.
You have several questions. What did you add to the veggies?
So the veggies, I added in fresh basil. Oh, in here, what veggies I have? The gnocchi. So yes, this is our gnocchi. It's a potato pasta that we cooked up. So it's essentially kind of made with mashed potatoes, flour, egg, and it's just a delicious kind of dense pasta ball. Not like a dumpling. A dumpling is more fluffy. These are going to be like more rich. And for it, I always say they're great to make if you have leftover mashed potatoes. Let's go grab our coffee cake out of the oven because it is just about to beep here. And then we can plate up our lunch. So I'm going to got that off. Let me grab my cup trivet and my holder. Look at our beautiful coffee cake. These are our mini loaves. And you can see they've puffed up lovely, making sure, nice and firm. You always want to make sure they're nice and firm on the top. Now, with these coming out, I'm not going to open them up right away because they're still going to be hot. So I want them to kind of cool off before I try to take them out. But they'll be sitting there ready for it. But just you can see on here like this crumb topping that we made with cinnamon, brown sugar, butter, and flour. So it's right there. We have that crumb topping also in the middle. And then the base to our coffee cake is a sourdough discard base with also a sour cream kind of vanilla cake middle. So absolutely delicious. Now let's serve up our lunch today. Let me grab, let's see. We're going to slide this guy out of the way. That way I can serve up right here. And let me grab my tongs for the chicken here. And then, of course, we're going to sprinkle a little Parmesan. Okay, so today for lunch, we made a delicious pesto gnocchi. So we've got our gnocchi pasta in here that we boiled up and then added into our sauce. That is chock full of zucchini, mushrooms, onions, and a nice kind of creamy pesto sauce. We also threw in some fresh green onions and fresh basil on it. And then we're going to be putting our kind of Italian sautéed chicken on here. This chicken was marinated with Worcestershire, Italian seasoning, garlic, salt, and a little bit of onion powder. And then we just sautéed it up in the pan to get that nice sear on it. And then we're going to top it with just a little bit of Parmesan cheese that will kind of just melt down and bring it all together. And then, of course, when our coffee cake has cooled, we'll have our sourdough discard coffee cake. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to that link, search for what we made. So we've got our gnocchi and our coffee cake, and you can watch and cook along with us again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that is full of all of our different cooking gear and gadgets. I've got my cutting boards, my knives, I've got my all-clad and my hex-clad pans, all my baking sheets, all the different gadgets I use in the kitchen I have there if you're interested in what we use in our kitchen. But again, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe.